welcome to Constructive Christianity. I'm your host, Peter Demas. Today we're going to dig deep into 1 Samuel and look at particularly the person of Saul. We're going to touch a little bit on Jonathan and David, but we're going to really look at the leadership traits of Saul. Our purpose is not necessarily to look at him and kind of judge him and say, oh, look how terrible of a leader he was. Our purpose is really to kind of learn from the failures that he made. You know, Saul was the first king of Israel. He was picked by God, but part of what made him popular among people was because he looked like a king. He was gigantic, he was big, but even from the very beginning, we see that even though God had picked Saul, it was really doing that to appease the people because the people said they wanted a king. They no longer wanted the judges. They wanted to be like everybody else. And even though the king that God had picked for Israel was not ready yet, and that was David, God went ahead and said, okay, this is what you want. We're going to go ahead and give it to you. We see already right from the very start that when Saul was picked, they couldn't find him. They're like, hey, where's the king that we anointed? And he was hiding. So we see that Saul is a person that was already riddled from fear. Now, but Saul still did some good. He was able to kind of unite the tribes to create one large country. He did create a standing army. There were several things he did that was good for Israel. But we're here to look at some of the problems that he had. We see in 1 Samuel 13:2 that when Saul created the standing army, there was 3,000 people. There were 2,000 that was under his leadership, and there was 1,000 under Jonathan's. But later, between 13:2 and 13:15, we see that Saul moved from 3,000 men to 600 because the rest went into hiding. So we need to say, okay, what happened? Why did it go from that period of time? What can we learn from Saul that we might be doing on a regular basis? So I want to first read to you from the Word of God in Samuel chapters 13. And I'm going to look at verses 7 through 12. It says, and some of the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. And as for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people following him were trembling. Then he waited 7 days according to the time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. So Saul said, bring a burnt offering and peace offerings here to me. And he offered the burnt offering. Now it happened as soon as he was finished presenting the burnt offering that Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might greet him, or that he might bless him. And Samuel said, what have you done? Saul said, well, when I saw the people were scattered from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and the Philistines gathered together, then I said, the Philistines will now come down on me, and I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore I felt compelled and offered a burnt offering. So we see already kind of some of the problems that happen from here. So I want to kind of talk about the 6 traits that we can learn from Samuel and learn from what Saul had done that were kind of the leadership failures at that time. So first of all, let's look at trait number 1. Trait number 1 is that Saul was impatient. You know, it says that he waited, talking about Saul, waited 7 days according to the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come. So Saul said, well, I can't wait. I can't wait any longer. Saul showed a lot of impatience. And then that's when he did it. But what's interesting is even though it says that Samuel did not come within the allotted time, he actually did, because later Samuel showed up later in the day. Samuel came like right after it happened and said, hey, what did you do? All Saul had to do was wait to the end of the day. But he was impatient. He had to go ahead and act. And he acted foolishly because of that. Now compare this to Moses. Moses, we know the patience of Job, and we talk about the patience of Job. It's actually a common phrase. But also look at Moses as a very patient person. Moses had, he was dealing with a lot of people that did not know any better. You got to realize that when Moses was leading the people out of Egypt, they were slaves. they did not know how to govern themselves. They did not know how to be a nation or a nation state at that point in time. Moses had to deal with people who were grumbling. He had to deal with people who rebelled, not only within his family that tried to rebel and say, look, I don't think that you should really be a real leader, or, hey, you married the wrong person. But he also had to deal with Korah and Korah's rebellion. That where they were trying to say, look, this is part of the problem. He had people that were unappreciative of him, and there were several times where God got so frustrated. God said, I'm going to strike him down, and Moses went and prayed for the people to ensure that they were saved and that they were taken care of. Moses had to not only he had to handle a lot of these problems that the people had internally. But Moses had to have patience with them, and he had to recognize what he had to do. And then they messed up to the point where they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And Moses, even then, what Moses kept him from getting into the promised land was actually Moses showed frustration and a lack of patience. God told him to speak to a rock, and instead Moses struck a rock and for them to get water. The problem is that Moses' emotional frustration, his impatience in that moment, again, kept him from going into the promised land. But Moses showed amazing patience, leading people, teaching people, doing the things that he needed to do in order to get people ready to move to the next stages of their life, and in order to start the build of an amazing nation that came from there. One of the things that we see with Moses in that situation where he struck that rock is that sometimes that impatience can prevent you from hearing God's word. I've done that. I think we've all done that at some level. There was one time in particular, I decided to buy another type of business. It was a franchise because I was impatient with what was happening in the business that I was in, and just a problem after problem after problem continued. And after that, we see that it cost me tens of thousands of dollars, and it ended up not getting that franchise because it was just something that God just didn't want me to do. And I did not spend the time listening to him, and I ended up saying, okay, this is what I need to do, and I need to move from there. A more recent example of patience that we see historically is Nelson Mandela. Mandela was the first South African president. He was the winner of a Nobel Peace Prize. He was the man who brought an end to apartheid in South Africa. And Mandela is an example where we see two situations where we're dealing with patience there. When Mandela first started out, he got very frustrated very early that apartheid was not ending on the time period that he wanted it to end on. He decided to go with an armed response, and he started trying to rally people to do an armed response against the government. And after 17 months of trying to get support, he ended up going to jail. He went to prison for 27 years, and that's where he learned patience. He learned the ability to how to change the world through his patience. Mandela was frequently known for saying the phrase, in the long run. In the long run, we're going to do this. He was also quoted as saying, we should not let an illusion of urgency force us to make decisions before we are ready. Now, what we're hearing here is that he's not sitting there when he sees all the problems around. He's like, look, we need to be patient. We need to make certain we're ready. We need to make certain that we have all the plans in place before we can move forward. And as a result of him learning that patience, that he was able, again, once he was released, not only to change the world, to become president. In this age, we see everything has to be fast. You're looking at social media, you look at your phones, everything, we want to do something and get it right now. We have this instant gratification that we have to have. And so many times we don't get it, and then we quit whatever it is. We quit our job because I didn't move up fast enough, so I'm going to quit my job and go somewhere else. Or I don't know what's about to happen here with a relationship, and it's not progressing as fast as I want to, so I'm just going to quit and find somebody else to do it. There's all these things that we have to have right away. If I can't get the financial status that I want to have. Instead of working slowly to get there, I can't do it. So instead, I might try to go commit a crime or do something that could harm somebody else so that I can get that instant gratification. We live in that society. But the patience and the people who are patient are the ones that are going to they're going to be more successful. They're going to be able to lead people better because they recognize that we're not in it for the immediate gratification, that we're in it for something much longer into that. So now we're going to move into the second trait. The second trait we see is that that Saul jumped into business he had no business doing. A lot of times we say in this day and age, he was kind of may have been a micromanager a little bit. That when we manage all the stuff and we kind of jump into these little things. Now, I don't think technically this is micromanaging, but there's a close similarity into it, because it's like, well, I need to do it because I don't trust you to do it yourself. I don't have confidence that you have the ability. In this particular situation, we see that Saul said, I don't trust you, Samuel, that you're going to be here the allotted time. And I feel that that it has to be done. I got to do this burnt offering. Again, he did not obviously understand there was a relationship with God, and we see that later. First of all, the burnt offering was not his job. He was not supposed to be doing a burnt offering. In fact, he never even set up an altar before that. We know that because we see that in 1 Samuel 14:35. It talks about the fact that Saul set up an altar for the very first time. Later in 15:30, we see where it says that Saul really was not that godly. I want to read to you from 15:30 real quick. Here it says, then he said, talking about Saul, and again he is talking to Samuel. He says, then he said, I have sinned. Yet honor me now, please, before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me that I may worship the Lord your God. He references God as Samuel's God, not my God. He's like, I want to worship my God. He never references God as my God. He references it as your God. We see that he wasn't even godly, yet at that same time, he thought, well, I can just set up the burnt offering. Many times, I'm going to kind of sidetrack a little bit from this particular leadership trait, because a lot of times I think we get so caught up in the ceremony that we end up kind of worshiping the ceremony more than we worship the God who the ceremony is designed for. God says all throughout. We see it a lot. We see it in Isaiah in particular, where He says, "I don't care about the sacrifices. That I want your heart." And I think we make that mistake a lot, that we kind of focus on that area, but that's from that's from a relationship side. There are many situations throughout history that we can see where people kind of jumped into work they weren't supposed to be doing, and it had a negative impact on the people they were leading. The first example I want to bring up is Charles the 12th. Charles the 12th was the king of Sweden. He took over the kingship at age 15. He was a brilliant military leader. He defeated all of the other countries around him, until he was left with Russia. And he defeated Russia many times, even though Russia had superior forces in front of him. He forced most of the countries around him into submission. But Sweden never became a gigantic long-term world power like Russia did for many years. And partly is because Charles the 12th was killed in his 30s. Now, it's unclear whether he was killed by a stray bullet. There was arguments that he was killed by musket fire from far away. There were some theories that he was assassinated. No one exactly knows how he was killed during that time. In fact, his body had been exhumed several times for them to do an autopsy to make a determination of how he was exactly killed. But the one thing we do know is where he was killed. He was killed at the trenches, in the front of the trenches. Now, this is not a situation of leading from the front and leading the charge. That's not a situation there. They were encamped at that area, and he was around the trenches. Now, we don't know exactly what he was doing. I could deduce that he might have been inspecting the trenches at that time, but we do know this, is that leaders should never be just kind of standing at the front line in trench warfare. That's not how that's supposed to work. And as a result of him being where he wasn't supposed to be, and doing part of the business he wasn't supposed to be doing, then we can see that he got killed from it. That he was not able to lead successfully in that way. Another example of a poor leadership characteristic is President Jimmy Carter. Now, again, I'm not discounting people or political parties or anything with that when I bring up some of these people, particularly in the U.S. presidential history. I'm merely pointing out flaws that they might have had, so that again that we can learn from it. President Carter was not considered to be a very strong president for us. Partly is because he always wanted to do things that wasn't his responsibility to do. For example, one of the things that President Carter was known for, he was known for inspecting the tennis courts at the White House. He would double check the math on proposals, and even took a speed reading course, not so that he can become more effective on it, but it was so that he can try to read all the documents instead of saying, hey, you're my staff person, I need you to give me a summary of what is said so that I can make the decisions. The result of him micromanaging not only kept him from prioritizing the right things, which put us into probably a much stronger recession during that time, during the late 70s and early 80s from it. It put us into a oil and gas crisis. We had problems with the Middle East during a large part of that time. But also his staff was discouraged and disgruntled. We see many people in this country had kind of lost hope in our country, that we were falling under the coattails of the Nixon scandal with Watergate and other problems that we had with Nixon. And then we have someone to take over who really was an ineffective leader at that time. And so as a result of that, the morale of the country was at an all-time low, for, at least for that generation on it. So we see where a lot of that can take place. Now, before I go into the third thing, I want to encourage you, those who are watching on Stream TV, continue watching. There's other great shows that are out here. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel. You can either subscribe to Constructive Christianity or Benevolent Faith TV, where this is being aired. So just subscribe. At this point in time, comment on people that you know, or not necessarily, don't name the people, but comment on leadership failures that you see that you might have worked for, that you might have done yourself. But let's, so again, that we can understand and know more about ways that we have failed as leaders. The third area, though, that I want to talk about is deception. We see the way that he greeted Samuel was like, what did I do? I'm just here. He didn't particularly start out with a lie, like I didn't do it, and kind of hide like a little kid sometimes would. When they're doing something. I remember telling my mother one time I was not allowed to go outside. She left me home by myself. I wasn't allowed to go outside, and it was raining out, and I went out and played in the rain and was sliding in the fields that was in my yard. And when I came in, I'm literally soaking wet, and my mother said, "Did you go outside?" And I said, "No." And literally, like rain is dripping off of me and off my clothes, and I'm telling her that I did not go outside. I wasn't a good liar, and obviously I got in a lot of trouble from that, from that situation. But we see that he was deceptive, which is just another type of lie that was there. When Samuel came up, Saul went up and greeted him like, "Well, what's going on? Like, I don't understand. Like, why is this I want you to come up and bless me, and pretend like nothing happened." Later we see another situation where he completely lied to Samuel about things. Here's here is where he did the exact same thing after in 1 Samuel 15. He was Saul was supposed to have killed the Amalekites, and including the king, but he kept the king and he kept the crops, the cows and the cattle and the herds and the sheep, and all the better ones he started keeping for himself. And so again, the same thing. Saul went up to Samuel when he saw him and said, "Hey, bless you, I performed the commandment of the Lord." And Samuel's immediately like, "Well, I hear the oxen, I hear the sheep. What are you doing?" But again, you see this where he's lying and he's doing this. Know that a good leader is full of honesty and full of integrity. So we see an example in the United States where where many of our leaders have lied, and it has become a big part of who they're remembered for. I know many times, presidents want to leave a legacy. The leaders want to leave a legacy behind. And when you practice deception and when you lie, sometimes that becomes your legacy. Nixon, here's an example concerning Watergate. Nixon said, "I can say categorically, no one in the White House staff, no one in the administration presently employed was involved in this very bizarre incident." Now, many of us people were involved. I want to say it was close to a dozen people that were involved. This lie and this deception ultimately led to Nixon's resignation. And it's one of the things that when you think of Nixon, one of the many things that you think about is the Watergate scandal. Another example of a president that was lied and was deceptive was President Bill Clinton. President Clinton is quoted by saying, "But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false, and I need to go back to work for the American people." Well, we subsequently learned after he gave that quote that he did have sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky, and it led to an impeachment hearing. It led to again a huge scandal that has riddled the Clinton family ever since. And again, there are many great things that Bill Clinton has done as president, but we see that his presidency will always be somehow attached to that Monica Lewinsky scandal. He is not the first president to have affairs in the White House. FDR did, Jack Kennedy did. I mean, there are countless others, and I'm sure there's some that we have no idea about that had affairs in the White House. But we do know that because he kind of lied about it, because he made such a big deal about it, that as a result of that deception, it kind of tied into it, and it made that part of his legacy that is there. So those are the first three traits of kind of leadership failures that we see. Again, we're gonna on the next episode that we do, we're gonna cover the next three traits of leadership failures that we see in Samuel, in the book of Samuel, that Saul had done. But again, I just kind of want to cover these first three that we did. The first one is being impatient. The second one is jumping into business you have no business doing, and the third one is deception. If you find yourself doing this, if you find yourself, behaving in these manners, because we all have these traits that will come up. Usually, it's because we're acting the same way that happened for Saul. It was kind of a fear base, and a lot of times that might have created some of these things that we do. We need to start correcting our behavior. We need to be honest with our people. We need to wait for the right. We need to wait for the right opportunities that are in front of us. So, and we just need to move forward with that. So again, stay tuned for our next episode as we're going to cover the last three traits, last three leadership failures that we would examine. And again, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to Benevolent Faith TV or to my channel as well. And then or tune in to Benevolent Faith TV on the Stream network. And look forward to seeing you next week.